Billionaire's twins were born blind until the new black maid found the light. Everyone believed that the twin daughters of a billionaire had been completely blind since birth. For years, no one questioned it. Not the doctors, not the staff, not even their father. The children grew up in silence, cut off from the world, hidden inside a mansion of glass and polished wood, where light passed through but never left warmth. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and hit like. And if you can drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, we'd love to know. The father's name was Richard Wakefield. He built his fortune in agriculture sharp with numbers and deals. But once the doors of his home closed, he was only a 42-year-old man with dark circles under his eyes. His wife had died in a helicopter crash days after giving birth. From then on, he moved out of the city to a place with more trees and fewer people. The house was wide, large glass windows, long corridors, exquisite furniture, but cold. The girls Luna and Lyra spent hours at the tall windows staring at the birch trees. They didn't play, they didn't laugh, just one worn teddy bear, one soft rug. Their eyes were open but fixed on nothing. Richard read stories, played music, described the colors of leaves, the smell of fresh bread. He changed the games, changed the hours, changed the specialists. He waited for a nod, a smile. Most of the time there was none. The nursery was still the way their mother had chosen it. Pastel curtains, a rocking chair by the crib. On the wall, a strip of wallpaper with animals. For years, Richard hadn't touched the place of each little creature. He only stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame. At night, he leaned his head in and whispered, "I'm sorry." His apology vanished into the walls. Few staff worked in the house, all moving softly, speaking quietly. They knew the girls' hourly schedule, where to set the water glass, which spot might creak. They avoided getting close, afraid to disturb. One day, Richard opened the door himself for a new hire. Julia Bennett stood on the step holding a canvas bag. She was a black woman much younger than him, slim with calm eyes like a morning lake. No jewelry, clean clothes, a face a little tired. She spoke little. So did he. Julia entered hearing the draft through the glass seams. She noticed how the carpet curled under the table legs, saw the dust moving in a streak of sunlight. On the first day, she only dusted, folded towels, shook rugs. She moved slowly, set things down gently, didn't touch the children unless needed. By noon, she sat in the kitchen to rest, opened her water bottle, and glanced through the half-open door. Lyra leaned against the wall, clutching her teddy. Luna sat near the frame of the window head, tilted as if listening to some thin thread of sound in the wooden floor. In the days that followed, Julia kept walking past. She didn't ask, didn't call, only let her presence be there, like a chair in the room. When she pulled the curtains slightly, a thin line of light slid across the rug. Lyra's eyelids flickered. Another time she stepped on the swollen plank of the floor, and the faint sound made Luna tilt her head. Julia stopped, set the cloth down, took a step back, repeated. The line of light moved, the shadow of her hand shifted. Lyra's lashes trembled like dew. Luna held her breath for one beat. Then all returned to stillness. At night, Richard asked, "Work going well?" Julia said, "Yes." He looked at her, waiting for more. She added softly, "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'll do my part." He nodded. It had been a long time since someone spoke without promising miracles. On the seventh day, the rag slipped from her hand onto the rug. A soft thud. Luna startled like a small bird. Julia whispered an apology as if to the wind. She sat down facing the window, her eyes angled so she could see the girls without making them feel watched. The day's sun ate its way across the wall. Lyra didn't turn her head, but her pupils seemed to shift. Julia didn't breathe too loudly. She counted in her mind 1, 2, 3. She drew the curtain a little. The line of light changed. A faint blink. She stood, washed her hands, and continued her work. No explanation. The house remained quiet, but those tiny movements for anyone who cared to notice had begun to change the air. Something small like a thin thread was slowly pulling two distant ends closer together. Julia began measuring silence. She tested very little each time. Early morning, she opened the window just a finger's width. No sound, no strong wind, only the change of light. Lyra paused for a second, as if listening with her skin. At noon, Julia crossed the rug, avoiding the creaking plank. Luna still tilted her head when Julia's shadow passed by. Julia said nothing, only opened her thin notebook and marked a small pencil dot beside the hour. One afternoon, Julia needed to check the time. She pulled out her phone. The flashlight flicked on by mistake, a white beam cutting through the air. The light touched Lyra's lashes like a small fish. A blink. Julia switched it off, stood still, waited, turned it on again. Another blink. No expression. Nothing remarkable to an outsider. But to someone counting each breath, it was an answer. The next day, Julia tried something bolder, yet still gentle. She spoke first, her voice just enough to hear, "I'm going to turn on a small light. If you feel anything, you don't have to say it right away." She sat down, holding the light low, not pointing it at their eyes. The beam cut across the room like a thread. Lyra froze for a beat. Her lips moved. A sound slipped out as faint as breath. "I think. I see. A light." Then she added one word, slow and trembling. "Mama." Julia didn't speak. She placed her hand on the rug so Lyra could reach if she wanted. Lyra placed her hand over Julia's. Luna said nothing. She slid closer, rested her head on Julia's arm as if searching for warmth. Two children, two different ways of calling safe. The room was as still as before a storm. At that moment, hurried footsteps sounded in the hallway. Richard stood in the doorway. He saw the flashlight in Julia's hand. His face changed color. "What are you doing?" His voice struck the walls. Julia set the light down, no defense. Lyra gripped tighter. Luna held closer. Richard looked at his daughter's hand, at the flashlight, at the young woman crouched low on the floor. His voice dropped. "There's light." Lyra nodded very slightly. "I saw a light." That night in his study, Richard placed a small box of eye drops on the desk. Old glass bottles, labels worn, the faded name of the doctor, Atticus Morrow. A tiny calendar marked daily, steady, for years. He turned to Julia. "Stop. Stop everything." Julia nodded. No more words needed. The first day after stopping, nothing was clear. The second day, morning sunlight slid through the hall. Lyra kept her face toward it longer than usual. In the afternoon, Julia set 3 black and white cards on the table, circle, square, triangle. She didn't explain much. She waited. After a while, Lyra touched the circle. Luna didn't touch the cards. She traced her hand along the edge of the ball. Julia rolled her head, tilting with its movement. Julia made a mark. Another mark. At night, Richard no longer stood in the doorway. He sat on the floor with his daughters. He held up an old photo. The red dress of the woman in it had dulled with time. Lyra squinted, searching, and asked, "What's that color called?" Richard couldn't answer right away. He had to swallow. Once, then said red. He looked down at his hand. It struck him how long it had been since he'd spoken that word in this house. Another evening, Julia drew the curtains earlier. The room didn't feel as heavy as before. Lyra pointed at a blanket. This color yellow. Luna touched the edge of the table, corner. 2 short words, 2 small doors opening. Julia prepared one corner with quiet, one with sunlight. She placed the teddy bear between. Each day something small happened. Not big, not loud. but enough for the adults in the house to begin to believe. Late at night, when the house was still, Julia opened her notebook. She drew a thin line across the days like a graph without numbers. She wrote 3 words, sunshadow touch. Then she added 1 short sentence beneath the page, 2 paths. She closed the notebook. The house breathed evenly, as if it had just passed through a long cough. In the bathroom cabinet behind a stack of thick towels there was a wooden box. Julia found it while searching for a small clip. She pulled the box out. Inside, 2 rows of glass vials. The labels looked the same, but each had a tiny different mark in the corner. 2 rows, 2 marks. Julia laid them side by side on a white towel. She took a photo with her phone. Her hand didn't tremble, but her heart did. She called Sophia, an old friend from nursing school who now worked in an ophthalmology department in the city. They met at a small cafe near the hospital. Julia slid 1 vial across the table in a zip bag. No long words. I need to know what's inside. Sophia nodded. They said nothing more. A few days later, Julia's phone buzzed. "Come," Sophia said. In a small room with a metal table, a sheet of paper lay waiting. Sophia pointed to a line of text. "This compound makes pupils sluggish with light. Long-term use, it dulls every signal." Julia stared at the printed words. Everything felt suddenly quiet, like someone had shut a glass door against the wind. Could it be a mistake? No. The 2 vials you gave me aren't the same. The ratios inside are different. Someone chose it that way. Julia held the sheet as if holding a photograph from a rainy day. Back home, she placed it on Richard's desk. He read it. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. Finally, he turned away, staring through the glass. "He told me the optic nerves were underdeveloped. He told me there was no response." I believed him. Julia said, "I don't know why, but this is real." Richard didn't answer, only sat down very slowly. The very next day, an article surfaced online. The headline hurled stones at Richard, claiming he ignored advice, refused critical treatments. Another article accused the maid of seeking attention, exaggerating progress. Strange messages landed on Julia's phone. "Stop. This isn't your business," she told Richard. He wanted to call the police. She said, "We don't know who sent it yet." They locked the doors, lowered the curtains. Inside, it was quieter than outside. Inside, Lyra began speaking more. "This color." That streak Luna traced the rim of a plate, naming corners. Julia set a small table, 3 objects each time. Something soft, something hard, something that caught the light. She didn't overpraise. She let the twins find joy themselves. Richard spent less time on business calls. In the evenings, he lingered longer listening to his daughter's short questions. The kitchen warmed. Yellow light from the hanging lamp spilled gently across the wooden table. Sophia called again. She said 1 sentence without extra words. "His name has been tied to many cases." Atticus Morrow. Julia didn't know much about those cases. She only knew that the bottles in the cabinet had lived in this house for years. One afternoon, Julia noticed the 2 symbols on the rows of vials differed by only 1 letter. A tiny detail. She set 2 side by side, snapped a macro shot. In the photo, the 2 small letters stood like bricks from different kilns. Julia sent it to Sophia. Soon, Sophia replied, "Different batch." Julia sat down, her hand resting on the table. 2 twin children, 2 different batches, 2 different speeds of change after stopping. Small details pieced together became an open door. Outside, the noise raged on. Inside, every day a new drawing appeared. Lyra loved yellow painting, long streaks like sunlight. Luna loved edges, drawing circles nested within each other. Julia pinned one on the fridge. The hallway air seemed to slow, as if pausing to look. Late at night, Julia stepped onto the porch. The sky was dark but not solid. Distant highway lights blinked. She thought of the word mama that had echoed in the room that day. Not a clear word, not a declaration. Just a hand, placed on a hand like two people crossing a narrow bridge. She didn't know how far the world outside would push, but inside the house the next path had already appeared. Hold still. Hold the sun hold hands. They carried a folder of documents into a building with tall glass walls. The man who received them was young. He flipped through each page. He didn't comment much, but when he reached the name Atticus Morrow, he looked up briefly. "You're not the first to mention this name." The short line clicked like a latch. The days after were filled with calls and waiting hours. Some doors opened, some doors shut. Then one day the news arrived he had been arrested in a distant state under a different name on his papers. The media turned its head. More parents came forward with their own stories. Their children hadn't improved, sometimes had worsened. They had spoken before, few had listened. The trial came. The courtroom wasn't as cold as in movies, just too bright with lights moderately noisy with shoes on the floor. Julia sat on the bench, hands resting on her knees. When her turn came, she took the stand. She didn't use big words. She told very little each time I drew the curtain. Lyra's lashes flickered. I stepped on the plank. Luna tilted her head. I switched on the light. Gently. Lyra said a sentence. Richard stood in the doorway. We stopped the medicine. Each line, like a small pebble, dropped into water. The listeners saw the ripples themselves. Richard also took the stand. He didn't defend himself. He said, "I believed." I was tired. I was afraid. I thought money could replace time. I was wrong. He looked down at the benches. His daughters sat a few rows away with another caregiver. Lyra fidgeted with a loose thread on her sleeve. Luna clutched the teddy bear. On the screen, 2 enlarged photographs of vial labels appeared. 2 different marks. No long explanation. Just shown. Then a thin graph came up. 1 line steeper, 1 less steep. Both climbing from a circled point the day the medicine stopped. No numbers. Only the date. The viewers understood. The opposing lawyer spoke about the complexity of diagnoses, about physiology, about chance. But the small details could not be taken back. A father's name, a child's name, a doctor's name, the symbols on a label, the flicker of an eyelid, the word mama, spoken in a room with sunlight. The verdict wasn't read quickly. People stood then, sat again. Guilty. Long sheets of paper. Heavy words. Somewhere procedures would be revised. Somewhere lists rewritten. But in that house what mattered was that tonight 2 children would sleep in their own room with a nightlight not too bright, the curtain half drawn, the teddy bear in the middle, and their father sitting on the floor reading a story with very few words. After the trial, Julia stepped outside. A light rain was falling. She carried no umbrella. Richard stood behind her, laid his hand on her shoulder for a moment, said nothing. They walked to the lot. The drizzle clung to their hair. In one corner, someone lifted a phone. In another, someone waved them off. They opened the car door. Inside, the twins were asleep. Lyra held the bear. Luna leaned on her sister's shoulder. Julia straightened the thin blanket. Richard started the car, set the music very low. That night, they didn't celebrate. They ate hot soup. They cut bread. Julia washed the dishes, listening to the steady stream of water. Richard opened a drawer, pulled out a sheet of paper with 2 childlike circles drawn. He pinned it to the fridge with an apple-shaped magnet. He stood looking for a long time. Not at the drawing, but at the 2 small words in the corner, Luna and Lyra. The season changed softly. In the mornings, a thin layer of mist lay over the grass in the backyard. The sunlight in the kitchen grew gentler. The wooden table now carried a few new streaks of color, tiny paint stains left behind by two small hands. An empty room had been turned into a studio, shelves of paper jars of paint-wet cloths. Lyra liked long strokes, yellow and orange. Luna liked edges, circles, and squares, placing them side by side for balance. On the first day of school, the twins held hands. The classroom was noisy, chalk dust, the smell of new paper. The teacher bent down, speaking slowly. "You can sit here." On the desk, she placed a small board with a picture schedule. Lyra sat near the window, Luna near the bookshelf. At recess, Lyra pointed at the sky. "Can that color go with this one?" Luna tapped a paper cup round. Warm. In the afternoon, Julia picked them up. On the way home, they talked non-stop about a classmate in a blue shirt, about a painting with too much red. Richard listened, his hands steady on the wheel. His eyes lit up like when he was young. At night, homework was brief. The rest of the time was for drawing. Julia played soft music. Lyra drew a huge sun. Luna drew overlapping circles, one slipping into another, like two small gears turning in sync. There was a ceremony in the city. They gave badges to children of perseverance. Lyra wore pale yellow. Luna wore blue. The stage was bright. When they went up, Lyra held Julia's hand. Luna held Richard's. The badges were pinned gently to their chests. Then the host said, "There's one more recognition." The light softened, for the woman who stood beside them when everything was darkest. Julia Bennett. Julia stood still for a moment as if to be sure she heard correctly. Then she walked forward. The twins wrapped their arms around her waist. The hall rose to its feet. The applause moved through, not loud but long. Years later, a small exhibition opened in a gallery downtown. On the walls hung 15 paintings. Each title marked a moment: curtain, drawn ray. Of sun fallen rag, flashlight mama. Lyra's works were warm, flowing like honey. Luna's were cool, steady lines, white spaces holding stillness. Visitors walked slowly, spoke little. When it came time to say a few words, Luna stepped to the microphone. She didn't look straight into the lights. She looked into the middle of the room. Her voice was calm. People often ask when I first saw light. They think I'll say it was the flashlight or the sun. But the first light I ever saw didn't come through my eyes. She turned toward Julia. It came from her heart. Lyra spoke softly, just enough for the microphone to catch. "We have 2 streams of light, one outside, one at home." When the crowd thinned, Richard stood with Julia before a painting of 2 circles touching. He said, "That day, if it weren't for you..." Julia shook her head. "That day, if it weren't for the children," she said, "they called us back in their own ways." Both fell silent for a while. Outside, the wind carried a dry leaf across the glass. At night, the house was still. 2 night lamps cast warm halos on the ceiling. Lyra turned in her sleep arms, still around her bear. Luna rested one hand on the edge of her blanket to keep it from slipping. Julia walked past, pulling the corner of the blanket into place. Richard stood in the doorway, not entering, only watching. He didn't say, "I'm sorry," like in the old years. He said something else, "Good night." The words weren't heavy. They were soft, just enough. A car passed on the road outside. Its light skimmed across the ceiling like a boat gliding over a river. Lyra blinked in her dream. Luna tilted her head slightly, then exhaled deeply. Julia closed the door gently. The house was no longer cold. It breathed. And somewhere, the 2 streams of light still moved side by side, not chasing, only arriving together. The truth had been revealed. It was never just lamps or morning sun, but 2 streams of light, one from the outside world and one from the heart of a mother. What do you think was the first light Luna and Lyra truly saw, the flashlight, the sunbeam, through the curtain, or Julia's embrace? Leave your thoughts below. I want to read your answers. If this story touched you, please like, share with someone who needs it, and subscribe with the bell on so you don't miss the next story.